Welcome, everyone, to After School with the Admins. My name is Marco Torillo, and I'm here with...
Desmond Caldwell. How's everyone doing?
Doing all right. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today. And we have actually a guest on the podcast. We brought someone in from Indiana, a great man I got a chance to meet in D.C. at the Educational Leadership Awards. This man was a finalist for Middle School Assistant Principal of the Year for the nation. So give it up for Justin Tucker.
Awesome. Well, Marco, Desmond, I truly appreciate being here. I appreciate you guys asking me to come on. I was excited to listen to some episodes before I got on here. So I'm just excited to be here and talk with you guys. Marco, as you shared, we had the opportunity to meet each other in DC, and it led to some great conversations. We got to talk about some things you're doing in your building, some things that I'm doing in my building. So I'm happy to be here, and we can kind of talk through all those, and I'll be introduced to some things maybe Des was doing in his building as well. So I'm excited to be here. So thanks so much for inviting me.
Anytime. Thank you so much for being a part of it today. So we'll get right into it. Why don't we start off with, I know, Justin, you had a saying that you brought off inside of DC that was called leading with kindness. Why don't you give us a little information on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good way to start off. So, and this was, I got to present in DC, Marco. So I think that's where you got to see a little bit of this at. But for me, I live my life, my professional life, my personal life, just basically everything I do based on a quote. And it's a quote from Conan O'Brien. If anybody remembers the late night wars back in 2010, it was Jay Leno and Conan O'Brien and that whole thing. And you had to choose a side, who was going to take what. And ultimately, Jay Leno ended up taking the show back from Conan O'Brien. But on Conan O'Brien's last show, he could have been resentful. He could have been upset, but he wasn't. He just left us with a beautiful quote. And that quote is, if you work really hard and you're kind, amazing things will happen. I'm telling you, amazing things will happen. So simply, if you work really hard and you're kind, amazing things are going to happen. And when I was a teacher, that's what I drove into my soul every day, is just work hard and be kind to kids, and amazing things are going to happen. And amazing things did. And when I began looking for assistant principal positions and was able to get back to my alma mater at Batesville High School, the whole drive was work hard, be kind through the process, amazing things are going to happen. And then when I got the job, that's how I approached it. And then transitioned to the Batesville Middle School. And same thing, work hard and be kind, and amazing things are going to happen. So for me, it has driven my day to day. Whenever tough decisions have to be made, I lean on that quote. Whenever tough days occur, because we all know as assistant principals or teachers, anyone in an administrative role or anyone in an educational role knows that there's going to be tough days. But you got to realize that the people that we work with are people's most prized possessions. It's their children, their own kids. So if we come to those kids and we're in a bad mood, or if we treat them poorly, we're going to regret it later on. So why even get into a mode where you're yelling or being upset with kids? Instead, work with families, work with kids, work with teachers, and be kind the entire time. And I think something that can be confused ultimately with kindness is that kindness is a weakness. I don't know why that is sometimes the where people jump to, that like you're weak in the chair if you're kind to people and you can't make a stand. That's not true at all. You can get to the same spot exactly where you would be if you were aggressive. You might even create more problems if you were aggressive and angry towards people. You can get people on your side just by simply being a good person, a good guy, a good female, whoever, just by being kind to people. You can get them on your side to be able to make the best decisions for kids all together as a collaborative effort. So, and that's the thing. We want parents to trust us with their children, right? So what we need to do, we need to create a partnership, and being kind is the approach that I take on a daily basis. So there's a lot of noise during the school day, but at the end of the day, a simple quote like this: if you work really hard and you're kind, amazing things will happen. Allow you to stick to your principles on a daily basis. So that's ultimately what works for me, and that's what drives my daily approach every single day.
I love that. In previous episodes, Marco and I have talked about restorative practices is a big thing, but like what I hear from you is um, something that we also say, which is we believe everyone is doing the best they can at any given moment based on, their skill set and what all they're dealing with, right? And that I feel like, that's part of what you're saying. Like, if we look at it as, from a asset based lens, like this, whatever is happening right now, this person is doing the best they can, right? And if I'm going to be kind, then I'm going to help support them through whatever it is, versus I am looking at them as though they are purposely trying to do harm. Um, and I think that coming at it from that perspective really truly puts things in perspective, and is really, if we're educators, then even when people are at their lowest, like we're educating, we're trying to support them in a way that is giving them a skill that they can use in a future situation, and ultimately that comes from a place of kindness, of wanting to help, um, and it can look different in different situations. So I really appreciate you sharing that hit home.
And Desmond, to point out exactly, to jump off your point, at the end of the day, as an assistant principal, many times you're working with parents, children, during their worst day, maybe the worst day of their life. And as a child, they may not have those skills to fully get through that.
Mhm.
So I put myself in that seat, and there were many times where I was in the assistant principal's office as a student, and I think back, how would I want to have been treated
Mhm.
during those most difficult days that I had? And to me, it was, I want to deal with somebody who's kind, supportive, and understands that these things are going to happen. Kids are going to make mistakes. I work at a middle school daily. We understand that that's a growing process every single day. And it's our goal to grow a student and support them through their entire process of middle school, so they're ready to grow even beyond high school later on. So, and I also truly believe that as educators, we are adults in these children's lives and families' lives. And sometimes the students that we deal with don't have support at home. They don't
Mhm.
have good models at home. And it's up to us to model how to appropriately handle those situations for children. If a kid comes into my office and I begin screaming and yelling at him for
Mhm.
doing something at recess or doing something at lunch, ultimately, when he's an adult, maybe he's going to learn from Mr. Tucker and scream and
Mhm.
yell. Right.
Right.
So I believe that instead having a kind, supportive, and sometimes direct conversation about these issues just to grow a student but to gain their trust as well, to know that we're on the same team and we're here to support them throughout. And I think if you take that approach, that many times that kid who does have some support at home, or parents to be around them at home, that message is going to go home and say, hey, Mr. Tucker really was nice or really was helpful today when I
Mhm.
got in trouble. And then that in turn is going to allow that parent to be on your team, to collaborative team, to work forward with those students. So I really believe kindness is something that is so important to the daily day-to-day operations of school, and working with everyone, working with people.
Yeah.
But the other piece about that quote is, it's not just kindness, right? It's work hard as well. You
Right.
have to be a hard worker, because everything's going to change, and there's going to be flexibility. And if you don't keep working hard for 1 minute, you're going to get behind on something, right? So we want to stay ahead on all things. So I think being kind and working hard is just so imperative to our day to day.
Yeah, thank you. I can tell you one of the things that drew me in during your presentation was your quote, and even the way you speak about it. Just it's infectious in the way that you kind of talk. You can tell the type of person that you are, the work ethic that you put in. The I can almost feel like I was in a classroom, like I'm in your office, and I can hear like how you interact with kids. Just the way that you spoke about like the passion you had behind that quote and the work that you're doing. You kind of get that feel. It's one of the reasons why I think right away when we started chatting, I'm like, okay, this guy is just like me and the individuals that I work with and I believe in. So it's like right when I heard that and kind of heard your quote, I was like, yep, I understand now why they chose him as one of the finalists.
Mhm.
So again, thank you for sharing that with us.
No, and I appreciate that, Marco. I think when we talked, I think I felt the same connection about your passion and the things that you provide to your school. And I was like, oh, this makes sense why he was selected as Connecticut Assistant Principal of the Year. With the process that you guys are putting in place for your kids at your school. And you mentioned the quote. I just before we transition maybe to something else, I think it'd be important just to say, I remember watching it on TV, and I remember grabbing a notepad and writing it down because it hit me so hard.
Mm.
And I think to anybody listening to who's like, gosh, where do you get these principles from? Where does a quote, can I just Google a quote and that's going to be something I live by? To me, I don't think it's something that you fake. It's something that sometimes some things just come into the world and it just hits you like a ton of bricks. And you got to hold on to that, and you got to remember that, and then just make sure that you write it down somewhere and then just keep driving, for that or from those perspectives.
Yeah, I try to steal everything I can from Des. So pretty much that's how I get most of my things. So I can keep myself at the forefront of the work that I'm doing. It's usually I'm just repeating whatever Des says. I just write it down when we're at these podcasts.
Yeah, I have a notepad right next to me right now, so I'm ready to go for that.
Listen, I've been known for some quotables, but not everything should be quoted.
So today's topic we wanted to talk about, though, was school safety. I remember back in your presentation, one of the things you talked about as a major area that you focused on through your time period over at your school was school safety. So I wanted to hear first, what is your definition of school safety?
So I think school safety is just a lot of different things. To me, I ended up kind of writing some notes down because when you asked me that question, I was like, I don't really think about the definition of school safety very often. So to me, what I ultimately put down is it basically is a measurement and policies aimed at protecting students, staff, visitors in different educational settings. The primary goal is to make sure we secure and we make sure we develop a secure and supportive learning environment for students. So that's going to include physical safety, emergency preparedness, bullying, prevention, mental health support, and that's just a couple things under the umbrella of school safety. So school safety is so many things, but ultimately what it is, just to ensure a secure and supportive learning environment for students on a daily basis.
Des, how about you?
I like that. I guess I would say it's a comprehensive, proactive, I would say framework, but it ensures that students, staff, community members, all members of the school community feel protected, secure emotionally, psychologically, they feel supported, and connected, with a sense of belonging to said community.
Very nice. Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think the same thing. I think for me, it's really that three prongs of mental, physical, and emotional protection when I think of school safety. Because, I think when people hear school safety, and like you said, you don't really ever think of that definition. But I think if you were to ask an outside person in education what that means, they're thinking of the doors, they're thinking of the fire alarms, the security cameras. They're not really thinking right away about the other aspects of it that we deal with when we talk about safety for students. We want to make sure that they do feel comfortable inside the building at all times, both emotionally, mentally, and physically throughout this entire time period. So I think it does encompass each of those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's so much to it, and being proactive is such a big piece to school safety. And when you think about school safety, sometimes people think reactive, right? But I think at the end of the day, there's so many proactive measures to that. And I know we're all, like we've talked in, a lot of educational terms or things like that. I think school safety at its most simplest definition is that we make sure that their babies come to our school and then their babies make it to the front door, by the end of the day. Right. And sometimes that's not just some of the things that people jump to, such as, ensuring intruders don't jump into or get into your building and all those types of things. It's about the mental health supports as well. Mm-hmm. What can we do from a proactive measure to ensure the emotional piece and the mental health piece for all students are there, and we're providing supports to those students and those families as well, who may not know exactly how to approach those things either. So we also need to be able to provide resources and all types of things, which falls under the huge umbrella of school safety.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been anything that you've done specifically since going to the school you're at now that have been major changes that you've made to try and support any of those areas?
Yes, actually. So I think during the presentation that you saw, Marco, I think my first question is, has anybody ever been in a building or a school where the answer is, well, that's just how we've always done it? Have we all kind of been in those situations before? And I think that that's kind of how school safety maybe, well, that was a large discussion when I first started, because when I became an administrator here, I felt like the culture of safety was something that it just wasn't there. There wasn't a lot of culture of safety. We were checking boxes. I felt like we felt kids were safe, but what are we really doing from a proactive measure to ensure kids are being safe and we are providing a safe environment for all those kids. So ultimately what I did is, because we had our buildings all over the place, like one building was doing this, another building was calling a lockdown something else, another building was doing this drill on this month, this drill on this month. Our mental health supports were all over the place. Our extracurricular plans were all over the place. DCS, like Department of Child Services procedures, were all over the place, all types of things. There really wasn't much of a threat assessment procedure or anything. So the first step to that is I got our assistant principals all together and just developed a safety team for our corporation. It didn't necessarily start as a safety team. It just began as collaboration to begin to say, hey, we need to all get on the same page. And they were the same way. Because when you talk about school safety, people become passionate about it when they're like, yes, we do need that. Those are things that people are passionate about. So really over a period from about 2017 until now, we have developed just a comprehensive safety measures throughout our entire corporation. For example, when I started, when we started this team in 2017, we did not have any SROs in our building. So if we had I was at the high school level, if we had like a drug issue, or if we had something that would involve police issues, involvement, I'm calling a resource from our community to try and help, which is not ideal, right? So to give you an example of the growth that we've had, we went from 0 to now we have 3 total. So we have 4 buildings in our corporation, but we nearly have 1 SRO per building at this point. So that's been huge growth. We've also developed reunification plans, which we did not have before. We also use the Virginia model for threat assessment, which we did not have before. And that has opened the door. The Virginia model for threat assessment has opened the door to also those students in need of support to provide resources for mental health supports, which we ultimately didn't have before. So it led to community partnerships with mental health resources. So there are so many different things that we have developed just over time, from a large scale to even a small scale, such as like training our substitutes as they get licensed, and with their substitute teacher's license, they begin substitute teaching. Now they all take a training course in order to begin working in our school, which was not the case before. We have extracurricular safety procedures and plans that are set in place that are like, hey, read this in case of an emergency, rather than like there's no plans in place and an emergency happens and we're like trying to figure it out on the fly. So many different things have been placed since that 2017. And that's not just all me. I'm the person talking. This is the safety team that's been developed. It started with, like I mentioned, with the assistant principals, but now has the SROs involved, has a superintendent at every meeting that we go to, at times has our special education director, at times has our transportation director, has our health services director. So it's developed into a very large comprehensive piece where we are covering the needs of all of our students from a school safety perspective, which I can say I'm just very proud looking at it now that getting the opportunity to talk about it. I'm very proud of the things that we have put in place from the school safety measures from where we started to where we are now.
Yeah, that's great. I think it is one of those things that you don't realize how much you may have done until you start speaking about it. Then you're like, wow, that actually is a lot. And you also start to wonder sometimes, How did we not have those things in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. It actually, Desmond and I were talking before the show today, and Desmond talked about his school and how his child is going to be in his school one day. And to me, it really made me think about, because we live in this community. If my kids come into this community, how would I want safety to be approached? So we just kind of all had those conversations and all developed safety in that way. How would we want it to look for our own children? You know, how do we want it to look for our students? So it really, when you start thinking of things from a personal approach and blend that personal and professional life, it really makes you passionate about particularly school safety.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially when you start to put it into that one fact of the matter of thinking of your own kids. Like thinking like, how would I want my own kids to be a part of this this school, and what would I want for them in those situations? You know, I hear you on some of those aspects too. You know, my own school, I actually work in a school where next year we are going to have doors for the first time in our classrooms. So like to think about that like I work in a school that we have a 1970s open classroom model where there are no doors in any of the classes. So like we think of all these safety things that we put in play and these things that we're doing. And we put measures in since my time being there. We were able to put a bunch of things in place. Like we have now like an electronic door lock that just shuts the main doors to each hallway and locks it. So it's not, because it used to be an individual would come running up with this door jamb that they'd have to pull out of the first locker and throw it in and make sure it locked in place. If it didn't, you could still open the door. It would like jimmy open. So it's like you look at this and you're going, I need a 65-year-old female to go in, pick up this about 50-pound metal bar and slide it into the doors, to trust that she's going to, for that situation, put that on this person when they're stressed, to save 140 kids. I'm like, can we please look at something a little more now instead? So like we were able to go and build some of those pieces in ourselves, but like still thinking of the fact that we don't have doors. So like you think of these types of safety things that we try to put in play. And right now we're still focusing on, I guess I would say, the physical aspect of safety when we talk about these pieces. I agree. I think it's interesting to think of how schools, and that's across the nation, have so many different policies and procedures, or have just kind of not thought about certain pieces. It's happened maybe in their states, some very tragic incidents or things like that have occurred, but like we still just almost go, not in my town. So think about it. So we don't want to put those things in place, because it's almost like what happens if you do put it in place.
Well, Marco, to that point, and I mean, you and I got to experience the NASSP experience. Desmond, I'm not sure if you're involved in that association or not. NASSP. Are you, Desmond? Are you an NASSP member?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, I got introduced to this. This is my first year really being involved in NASSP, and part of their North Star is to disrupt education. And I think, Marco, to your point, sometimes it's very easy, right, to not ask those questions. Hey, why don't we have doors? Hey, why don't we have this? Why don't we do this? Because, right, back to my original point. Well, that's how we've always done it, and it's very easy to coast to that's how we've always done it, right? But the only way to have those conversations is to cause a little disruption and say, hey, we need to have doors. We need to have this. We need to have that. And then it starts getting on the attention of people's minds. And then before you know it, now you've got people together on the same page going for a common goal, such as just commonly getting doors. So I think that piece of sometimes you just have to disrupt a little bit to light the match to get that fire started. So ultimately for the betterment of students.
Des, in your school district, school, or in the schools you've worked in the past, what are some of the things that you've kind of had to help implement or put into play to try and organize some of the physical safety aspects?
Yeah. So physical. So let me say, so it's interesting, Justin, listening to some of the things that you worked to bring into the schools, and some of those same things, like so my district, we worked to remove or not bring into schools. So I've worked in a couple different districts that worked to remove police officers from the school buildings. There was, so there's a lot that happened within those communities. So we can talk about that a little bit later. But as far as the physical safety, we also have a safety committee, which I lead, and we have a comprehensive plan. My plan is probably 280 pages of, like, if this were to happen, this is what we do, and this person does this, and this is right. Like, so it's a lot. So one of the things that we do that I find to be really, really helpful is we do tabletop scenarios. And so we all get together, and there's sort of this scenario presented, and this thing happens. All right, I'm in this place. Typically I might be the point person. Incident command is what we call it. But if for whatever reason I happen to be on a different area of the school, I'm not present for this thing that happens in this space, somebody else has to take over, because maybe we end up in a lockdown situation, and who does what and how do we, work through that. So I think that helps to make people feel more confident that one, the people who are going to actually be involved in being the leaders in those situations and being the decision makers, they feel more confident that, number one, this is what I would do, and I know that the people behind me know to do these things, so that I feel protected. But also the community as a whole recognizes that we do these things. And so I think one of the scariest things is being, like, locked in the classroom and having no clue what's going on. But feeling confident that regardless of what's going on, the people who are making the decisions know what is happening. They know what's going on. But I'm also blessed to be in a building that is, I think this summer will be 10 years since the building was built. And so we have we have a bunch of different safety measures in place. We've got what we call a person trap, where even if you get in the building, you're still not in the building yet, right? So you've got to be buzzed in multiple times before you can get into, say, the heart of the building. And even then, if we go into lockdown, everyone has so much time to get into their spaces and be locked down and be safe before you can get that far into the building that you don't necessarily, you may not have access to anyone. We allow everyone access to put us in a lockdown situation. So it's not a situation where just a handful of people can make that determination. Everyone is trained. Everybody recognizes that if this thing were to happen, this is how we communicate. This is what we communicate. And then once everybody's in lockdown, there's still additional ways for us to communicate electronically with each other. So there, we use a program called Raptor, which everyone has on their computers or cell phones, and we're able to communicate with each other. Everyone has the ability, because we can stay in communication with each other, if there is an issue on a particular hallway, on a particular floor, when that is communicated, people who are in a different part of the building can follow Alice protocols. And if you deem that it is safer to leave and go to different locations that we have set up and have partnerships with, then you can choose to do that, and you would communicate. And then when it comes time for reunification, we know where we come back together to unify. So we spend a lot of time building this plan and making sure people are knowledgeable about what what aspects fall into the plan. And so families will know a little bit about the plan. Students obviously know a little bit more about the plan. Um, Staff know more about the plan, and then the committee, obviously, the safety committee obviously has a true, really deep, rich understanding of all the different pieces at play.
Thank you so much for that. Justin, do you know what ALICE training is?
I do
Oh,
actually. We just implemented that this school year. That was
wow.
another huge step for our safety team, is to be able to implement procedures for lockdowns and other intruder events. So it was something that we have always had lockdown procedures that were basically based off of Alice, but we came to the conclusion that rather than like Justin Tucker determining what is safest for everyone, why don't we use a research-based service and research-based knowledge from Alice to implement that. And I honestly, that was something we've been discussing for many years. So it was something that I was super excited about, that we implemented that this year. We have 5 professional development days throughout our school year that are strictly for professional development the entire day. One of those days this year was Alice training. So we spent the entire day training through Alice, and it was great. It was very well received by our staff. And I think we're now prepared for those types of events if unfortunately they were to ever occur.
Yeah. How many committees do you have that are involved around school safety? For questions to either of you guys. Like, I know for myself, we have a medical emergency team, we have our threat assessment team, and then we have our school safety. So you think of school safety kind of overlapping, sees all aspects of what's going on, these physical things we've talked about. Our medical is by some chance something were to ever happen medically with someone in the building, who is to respond in that situation, get the medical kit, get all that kind of stuff going. And then we have our threat team that is, that review all incidents that could be considered a threat against others or against the school and determine on next steps and functions that will occur for us. These are like some of the teams that we have. Is that similar to you guys, or do you guys have one specific team that kind of like in Lord of the Rings, the one that rules them all? Or is it a situation that you guys have different teams for different aspects?
I think just to speak on that, Marco, I think that's a really good question, because I'm actually happy that you shared that, because I'm always like, now that we're talking, I wonder what everybody has, from just how many teams and what do they approach? What do they really target? So for us, we call it our Orders and Operations Committee. Basically, it is our safety team for our building level. Every building has their own safety team or Orders and Operations Committee. Then in turn, we have our corporation safety team that then takes things. So we feed up things from the Orders and Operations Committee to the corporation safety team and then make decisions based on that. Additionally, we have, so in other teams that you're talking about, for instance, we have CPI teams. Do you guys have CPI teams?
What would CPI stand for would be my question.
Crisis Prevention Institute teams. Ultimately,
we have a crisis team is what we
Gotcha,
call
crisis team. Okay, so we have a crisis team. Basically, we're developing a cardiac team as well. Basically, probably familiar with your medical team, or probably nearly the same as the medical team. And we also have. We're in the midst of developing our threat assessment teams to make them more comprehensive. So right now, only a couple eyes get on our threat assessments, and we're developing processes to ensure that even more eyes get on those in case there's additional resources that we can use to support those students.
Okay. Des, how about you?
I think that so when you started talking, I was thinking, yeah, we're sort of Lord of the Rings, in that there is the one safety committee that rules them all. But the more I think about it, the safety committee is made up of people who constantly have all those other meetings.
Yeah.
And so I think so many of those things happen or so many other conversations happen in other spaces. Obviously, the nurse leads anything that has to do with medical, and our social workers are always meeting and talking about our trauma responses to number of things and communicating with us. And we have our we've got a team that is always monitoring all the different chemicals we have in our building and making sure that they are accounted for and in safe spaces. And all these people, and certainly more than just those, but all come together for our safety committee meetings. Yeah, I appreciate you explaining your breakdown, because I would have said that there was just the one team that came together. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's the more I think about it, it's so much that they are bringing to the table and sharing and building the agendas based on conversations they're having in other spaces. I think the other thing that is important is every time we have a situation, we come together and we debrief the situation. And so we look at it from as many angles as we can. We look at it from, an equity standpoint. We look at it from trauma-informed standpoints. We look at it from, how we communicated the things with parents, how we communicated with staff. And we break down, these are areas that went according to plan. These are areas that we did not necessarily feel like we met the mark. These are areas where outside supports or resources came in, and we would have liked to have seen these things happen differently. And thankfully, we're also able to, even though we don't have resource officers, we're able to communicate with our local public safety officers and be able to talk through, this is how this thing happened. We would love for this to have been the case, or if this is your protocol, then how can we react differently so that we can take these other things into consideration. So we have a really good relationship with them, because they are also always invited to our safety committee meetings.
Do you guys have a director of safety for your corporations?
Mm-hmm. I do, yeah.
We do. Yeah, we have a director of school safety.
And that for us was added about a year and a half ago. That was something that we didn't have for several years. And then we just, with the growth of our team and the growth of our committee, added that director of school safety, which has been a really nice thing for me to kind of pass off. You know what I mean? From when we started it, it was just kind of growing, and it's nice to have somebody to be able to oversee that who does a great job.
Is that person like retired public safety in some way?
They are a school resource officer.
Okay.
They basically were they're actually not retired. They're nearly my age, but so they were in some leadership positions in their police department.
Mm-hmm.
Came over just from a different perspective, and I think some things, just as on the safety topic, think some things from whether it's school resource officers or it's outside public safety agencies. I think there's always something super important about the perspective of people that work in education to be able to develop school safety for schools. Because I think when you think from a police perspective, or you think from a public safety perspective, sometimes you don't realize the ins and outs of a day-to-day school situation. So while we have our director of safety, and like I said, does a great job, it's always nice to hear some of his perspectives from his public safety experiences, but also he's able to lean on us administrators and educators on the team from a education safety perspective.
And I think that goes even the opposite way too, because to go with where I know, well, at least I shouldn't say I know, where I think Des went with why they have removed some of the police officers in the building is where they see things from the public safety side of it all, where we see it from the educational side. That same thing could be a problem that happens in confrontations with students, because what happens is a lot of times individuals who've never worked in a school or never had that training of how to interact during those confrontations, they struggle sometimes with the confrontation and can escalate it rather than de-escalate it. Yeah. That's why a lot of times that training is very important for it. Like we do a lot of training with all of our SPOs, which are security guards in the buildings, to get a chance to know about it and make sure that they have that specific training and understanding how to de-escalate rather than help push things to another level when we're hoping it's going to stop it from keeping going.
And Marco, I think you nailed it on the head. I think de-escalation is the main goal in any type of escalated situation. And I think that only comes with understanding that you're working with children and having training to understand you're working with children who do not have sometimes the skills to de-escalate without support. So making sure that everybody who is working with kids understands that sometimes they don't have the same skills as what like a 28-year-old might have. You know?
So for one final question I have when it comes to that school safety side, we've really talked a lot of that physical side. We're going to move to that mental and emotional side of it all. Where does equity, belonging, inclusion, anti-bullying, those things do you think fall into school safety? Because we've talked a lot about those major structures we put in place for big incidents. But when we think of school safety, really it's what happens on the day-to-day in those areas. What do we put in place in your schools?
I think honestly, I would like to hear Desmond or Marco's. I mean, Desmond or yours perspective on that at first, just to kind of understand where you guys are coming from.
I'm happy to start if you're okay with that, Marco. Okay. All right. So I think that, I mean, if we're looking at like sort of like that pyramid, this is the largest part of safety in a school. And I would never liken children to animals, but I think it's important to sort of share this analogy that has really, really, really jumped out at me recently. Marco, I don't know if I told you, but the Caldwell household finally has a puppy, which has been a long time
No, but
coming.
I'm happy that you have one now.
It's a long time coming. So I found myself spending a lot of time paying attention to like dog training videos and things like that. And something that stood out to me, because I really want to bring the puppy to a dog park, and I don't think we're ready for that yet. But one of the things that stood out to me was a gentleman whose name I don't remember, but he was explaining how some people put their dogs in situations where the dog will lash out or look as though they're attacking another dog because the dog feels unsafe. And spoke to how he positions his body so that his dog can feel protected, and so doesn't feel that need to have to protect itself because it feels protected by him. And it really got me thinking about the things that we put in place at school, right? I think back to times where students have felt like they had to fight. There was no other option for them. There are situations that are bigger than they can handle. And so they feel like the only way I can get through this situation is I have to fight. I have to stand up for myself. I have to put an end to whatever is happening that is causing me to feel unsafe, that is causing me to feel like I don't belong in this community. And I think that relates to human beings as well. And so what we try to do, certainly what I try to do, is build systems that allow for students to navigate through situations that they may not necessarily have the skill set for. And so for us, it is very, very heavy on restorative practices. And the idea that anyone in the building can request a conversation with anyone else in the building, and we will prep individuals for those conversations. And so we routinely have students who will come to us and say, um, you know, there was a group chat and this thing was said, and I really want to confront this person about what they, allegedly said about me, or, whatever messages were sent to me, or, a phone call I got, or was overheard in the cafeteria or whatever. And in years past, the students would have confronted each other in the cafeteria or in the bathroom or in a hallway or outside. I still call it recess, even though high schoolers get really mad when I call their time after lunch outside recess. um, but those situations in those environments are bigger than the two individuals because there are so many. The audience is so big, and after a while, it becomes students performing for each other in some situations, and that can turn into much bigger and unsafe reactions. And so we make it known that these things exist. You can always request, and the students know who they can talk to. But that is a part of a piece of that restorative approach that we try to put in place, because we recognize that, again, you didn't come to school because you wanted to fight today, right? You may have come to school with this feeling that I may get into a fight today based on the various things that have been happening, but you didn't come to school for the sole purpose of I want to fight today. So again, knowing that that is not where you're coming from, and we are going to provide some supports and help for you. But also, we're always training our staff to recognize signs of trauma and how to de-escalate rather than just focusing on punishing students. So again, students know that when they show up to my office, there are times you're going to leave with a consequence, right? But it is not a given that, it's not that, oh, so, Mr. Caldwell called the classroom and everyone's like, ooh, you're in trouble, right? Understanding that we are always trying to build strong, supportive relationships between students and adults. We use the words relationships and connections because relationships are great, but sometimes relationships can break, and we still need to have those connections after that. These things that we have in common, these things that still, sort of bind us together. We want to make sure that our systems are focused on emotional regulation. And so we focus on providing students with skills that we recognize that are needed. And that may be in the form of individual meetings and conversations, group meetings. It may be, part of a plan, a formal plan, or informal plan. It can be boys group, girls group. It can be different clubs and activities. Like, we try to build those conversations as natural pieces. We try to start classrooms with circles so we understand where students are coming from and how they're entering these spaces. And we try to make sure that our policies are equitable and culturally responsive. That's one of the things that led to, it's there is an anxiety that many of our students experience when they walk into a space and they see a person in uniform. Their experiences have not been great experiences for many, not all, right? Like my particular school, I think we have something like 40 communities coming together in our school, right? Some larger city, some very small towns. Their experiences are very different, and their communities are very different. And so Justin, going back to what you said about kindness, we talk about some students not necessarily experiencing that kindness outside of their community. Other students experience, that's all they experience in their community. And so if I react in a way that they feel is harsh and unkind, then there is a sort of visceral response. They feel like, oh my goodness, this guy hates me. I never want to speak to him again. Whereas another student from a different community would see it as, oh no, that's just tough love, right? And so understanding, building those bonds and relationships and having some interactions with students, be it in our monthly meetings or community meetings, in their classrooms, interacting, sitting in and being part of their academic groups and helping them with classwork or joining the group discussions. Like those kind of things help, I think, humanize me in a way that in those other situations, it is not, oh boy, here's this really, really big guy who, I've only ever seen yell at kids, and now he wants to speak to me. So it's a lot that has to come together to form this place where kids, don't just feel physically safe, but like they need to be safe to learn, to grow, to make mistakes. As Bettina Love says, more than just survive, they need to thrive.
Well, and to that point, I think while we talk about a lot of physical things with school safety, right? At the end of the day, it is super important for everyone just to feel safe. Because that is a huge piece to the mental health support that we provide kids on a daily basis, is to make them have that sense of belonging every single day within their school building. And Desmond, I really appreciate you sharing what you shared. I mean, that provides me, I'm from Indiana, right? I don't necessarily get to talk to Connecticut administrators on a daily basis. So hearing your perspective to me is very helpful. But I think something that we definitely have in common is that how do you resolve conflict, right? How do we limit conflict? The answer in a lot of ways is that you make people feel like they're a part of something.
Right.
It's a part of something bigger than themselves, such as like in our building, for instance, we are developing a brand new schedule, next year. And we have used basically 100% student feedback mixed with some staff feedback to develop a schedule that meets our students' needs. And now our students have buy-in and are excited about that. And that also, I know I'm going into scheduling and not school safety, but that creates that dynamic of feeling like a sense of belonging, which in turn makes people feel safe. Like, hey, they have my back. I'm here to be supported. So I think that's such an important thing. And that whether that's us by modeling things or by kindness, whatever, or just picking up a piece of trash in the hallway along our walk, throughout our school halls, it shows everybody that everybody has pride in something and that there's truly a sense of belonging, that they are a part of something bigger than themselves.
I think we've gone through quite a bit here today on our discussions about safety. Got a good chance to talk a little bit about kindness beforehand. Justin, any final words?
I think in everything that we talked about today, which obviously there's so many topics throughout education that we could talk about, right? But being able to talk about school safety and kindness, which is something I am just so passionate about. I absolutely love being able to be on here. But I think just to finish one more time with the quote that I use on a daily basis, and I would give this advice to anyone, that truly, if you work really hard and you're kind, amazing things are going to happen. Sometimes we try to make life and our jobs a little bit too difficult because it is difficult. It's a very hard career path to get into because you have a lot of people that are leaning on you. You get interrupted every 5 seconds throughout the day. You need this. You have to be an expert on so many different levels and so many different fields because just how many different things come to you on a daily basis. But at the end of the day, keep things simple and work hard and be kind, and you're going to have amazing results.
Great words. Des, any final words?
No, nope. I don't believe in preaching after the pastor has preached. So I'm gonna let Justin have that last word. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Des, Justin, thank you so much for being a part of it. School's out.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Know this, you all will be missed. Until then, I gotta blow you a kiss. Until we meet again on that other side, this my rhyme. We all love you to the end of this time, always. Know this, you all will be missed. Until then,